Hello and welcome. We are so excited for you to join this conversation around simplifying interactive items by content area. This afternoon, I am joined by our hosts, Emily Cram and Kajisha Toulouse-May. They are part of our product management team and here to share some wonderful insights with these new items. And I am Tara Whedon, your curriculum and learning design manager here at Eduphoria. I will be playing the role of moderator as well as helping to present some of the topics this afternoon. Before we begin with our content, some housekeeping reminders. We are recording this session and you will gain access to that approximately 24 hours via the email that you use to register. So if you are here, you will be getting an email recording of this content as well as the resources that we will be sharing with you this afternoon. In addition, we have some ways for you to engage with us today. The Q&A window should be reserved for questions that you have that are general about our topic this afternoon. If you have specific things for your site setup, we ask that you contact us at training@eduphoria.net or support@eduphoria.net so we can help you troubleshoot those items. We also have a chat available and we will invite you to engage in that chat throughout our presentation to give us some insights on how are interactive items going for you in your district, as well as some other opportunities there. Feel free to share and connect with one another in that chat as well. So the topics we'll be covering this afternoon, we'll start out with some conversation around what tools are available for online testing with AWARE. We'll then get into the bulk of our content and look at these items by content area and give you some examples to help you get started or help you continue where you are. We'll also hear from our product managers, what's next? What can you expect as we continue to work in the area of online assessment and supporting your students with these tools? Throughout, we'll use that Q&A to answer your questions, as well as reserve some moments at the end where we can speak to those questions that might be something that the whole group would benefit from. We do have a couple extra hands on deck to help with that Q&A, so please do ask us your questions. If we don't reach them by the end of our presentation, we will follow up with you. So here's our first opportunity to engage in that chat. We'd love to know, do you agree, disagree, or are you still on the fence and undecided about the following statement? New item types will make assessments more engaging for your students. So let us know in that chat. Seeing a lot of agreement, lots of excitement related to this. A couple undecided. We even got a thumbs up thrown in there. Some of us are borderline agreement, neutral. Love it. Love to see kind of getting that temperature check, how we're doing with this. So continue, if you haven't yet, drop that in the chat for us so we can continue to review your responses. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Emily to kick off our next section on AWARE online testing tools.
Hey, great. It's so exciting to see everybody agreeing. I was just with a group of teachers yesterday and they were starting to get on that same page and say, maybe kids won't just click through the assessment and answer questions anymore. And I was like, yep, it's a positive way to think about it. So exciting. I love the positivity. What we're going to kick off with right now is we're just going to do a refresher of the online testing tools that you have available. We're releasing a lot, and there's been a lot over the past year. So we just want to make sure you know everything you have at your fingertips as we go into this new year of solely online testing. So some of the first things we'll talk about are the online test settings. So these are set again at the test level. So you could turn these on, and when they are enabled, it affects every student that interacts with this assessment. So some of these are great. You could automatically turn on a calculator to support students. You could automatically turn on spelling assistance. This is one I'm going to lean into a little bit because as I've had conversations with teachers, the text entry question is a little bit scary with some spelling, and we certainly don't want to penalize young students for spelling. So why not enable spelling support for our younger students? Or again, that can be a transitional piece that we turn it on for a while and then we remove that. to kind of make sure that we're poking our students and saying, hey, make sure that you look at spelling, and that's going to be important moving forward. So that's just a little piece that can be turned on for everybody. Question randomization, again, as well, we have lots that love question randomization so that the order of the questions and the answers is not identical for each student as they're taking the test. And then we also have our own lockdown browser. And so again, if you really want that experience of a student being in the testing site and being locked in there, just like they would on test day, that's a great opportunity to really lock them into that one browser and limit them to taking that test. So we wanted to mention those, and we have some more.
We have a question in the chat, Emily, about the available calculators. At this time, all 4 of our available calculators are supported through Desmos. I just wanted to clarify that before we move on.
Yes, that is correct. We are using Desmos. Okay, so some additional online testing tools that we have available for students would include content clarification. We also have text to speech, and I threw in there, if you hadn't seen very recently, we released math support with alternative text for text to speech. So that should be a great addition for the majority of our new interactive questions. So you can do alternative text so that it's said correctly. Yay, big win for math people. And the online help guide is linked there that we will send out with this as a resource. We also have an online dictionary. We have English and Spanish that can be enabled at the test level as well. We have our student score summary, which is one of my personal favorites. This allows the students to go back and review which questions they missed on the test. And Kajisha will be joining us to talk a little bit more about that today too. And then we have an online ruler, which is a great solution as well for students who need that ruler as a support for these question types. And another one that is great moving forward is the online reference document. So again, we're moving into this online world of needing to have those math formula charts, for example, and that reference document is a great way to make sure that that attached document is there for reference for a student to use while online, and getting them used to not necessarily having that paper copy, but having it available online. All right, and then general accessibility tools. So these would be available for really all kids. So when a student goes in, they of course have Zoom, they can zoom in, they can zoom out, they can do color contrast. They have a highlighter so that they can highlight words. And they also have a notepad tool. And again, I love our notepad tool because it works very well in conjunction with that student score summary. And it allows the teacher to interactively see what the student is typing into that notepad. So that's a great little tool for revisions with tests for a student. We also have question flagging. So if you have a question that a student wants to go back and review, they can flag it. We have answer elimination on those questions that are appropriate. We have a Spanish interface to where all of the buttons are translated into Spanish for a student to use. And then we have that question guide. So all of these are really great resources to start exposing your students to. And I just had this conversation again the other day with a group of teachers. Maybe on that first test, like let's go over each one of these and talk about each of these tools and how the student can use these to help themselves on the assessment. So making sure that they understand they have all of these at their fingertips and should be fully utilizing them. So that first test, whether it be an actual assessment or whether it be just an informal test that's given, it's a great time to walk around and say, hey, have you seen the highlighter tool? Would you like to highlight as you're reading? And just point out some of these tools for students so that they know where they are and start getting exposed to those early. Okay, so we'll stop and get a little bit of feedback from you. That was a great review of each of those student tools for online testing, and see which one do you utilize the most. And you can even feel free to just shout one of these out and say online dictionary, or you can say, I have it listed, the testing by supports. So maybe you use those test supports at the test level. Maybe you use student support tools, or maybe you're really starting to focus on those student accessibility tools with students. So just give us some shout outs. Which ones are you really using, focusing on, and really making sure that everybody is aware of? Student supports. Very good. Yes, student supports is the main reason we're really going to this online world of testing. So we might as well make sure those are on and ready to go. I like it. Very good. Lots of student supports. Great. Okay, we will move on. And this is really the meat of the content today. So we are really going into the item types, and we're going into them by content area. So again, the goal is to simplify each one of these and to break them down, because it can seem very overwhelming when you look at all of the new question types from bird's eye view. But when you start breaking them down by content area, it gets less and less overwhelming. And so that's our goal today, to take you through that process and then to really give you some supports as you work together as a team to really start building ways to manage all of this new and transition. Okay, so I'm going to start with reading language arts, and we're going to start with hot text. So the way that Tara and I are going through this is we're talking you through, what does the standard say? How is it taught? And then how do you see it tested? And in some cases, how do you see it tested here? And in other, we'll talk about how could you test? So what does that actually look like? Okay, so for this one, the written standard is really asking us to look at appropriate use of verbs, tenses, and whether it's in that active or passive voice. So we're asking for a couple of things here. And as we teach this, a lot of times we model this as teachers. We use correct verb tense. We correct students in their practice and how they speak. And then, of course, we expect them to write and speak to each other in that same correct tense as well. And as an extension of that, then we add on, what does that active and passive voice look like? So if you see here in our example, this is just one that either we've gone through and we've looked at item bank ones, or we've seen some recreated ones in Cambium, and we're giving those to you as examples today. So this one has 4 different sentences. And again, it's hot text, and it's asking the student to identify the active voice to call attention to the scientist. So while this one is just one that the student's going to click and select the right sentence that fits the prompt, you can see that if we really kind of go back to the verb, it's really asking students to consistently and appropriately use the verb tense correctly. And so for this one, you kind of think, well, this is a great way to identify early on that early iteration of depth of knowledge to see if students can just regurgitate that information for you. But based on the standard, it may be more appropriate to actually have students write sentences for you. So it may be a text entry, could be another possible use of this actual question for the standard, or maybe you want to keep it a constructed response, depending on which direction that you want to go. But you could see, depending on where you are instructionally, this question could be great for hot text. Or you may want to go deeper and see, is mastery really there? So we want to give you some opportunity to think through these at different levels. And so this one is hot text, and we'll go ahead and we'll move on to another example. Okay, so now we have multipart. And so multipart is another one that is big in reading language arts. And so the standard that we have here is really talking about the author's use of imagery and what that looks like to achieve purposes. And so for this, we have a multipart question, which asks you to really look at what is figurative language, because that's the first part of it. So, we have to be able to identify. We teach kids how to identify what figurative language is, what it looks like, what it sounds like. And then we have to ask them, what do you think the purpose is of figurative language? And then finally, why is the author using figurative language? And so here you'll just notice in this two-part question, we're getting to some basics around that. So we're asking them to identify it, and then we're asking them to tell us or pick a reason that why they think the author is using that. And so what is it? And why do you think the author is asking you to use it? So again, this could be a great example of maybe a DOK2 because we're identifying it and then we're also describing it. But at the same time, we could look at this on a deeper level too and say, are they able to describe that in their own words? And maybe we would want to go to a constructed response if we were really looking for some deeper purpose in that. So we like to have this conversation because, again, a lot of these can come straight from the item bank. So at what level are we teaching and at what level are we assessing? So do those necessarily match the direction that we're going? And sometimes the item bank doesn't always fit. So we may want to adapt some of those. Okay, and then this is my favorite part. We have really broken down the TEA chart of all of the different questions and the new question types by content area, and we've just focused on one and kind of given you a big picture. And so for RLA, you'll see that there are the top 5 question types that apply everywhere. So inline choice, multi-part, multi-select, short constructed response, and then your extended constructed response really apply to everybody. So these are a great place to start conversation. Maybe you start rolling some of these into the assessment, and that's great as well, because then we're having the same conversation about inline choice, because that was the first new item type we added to the assessment. So now we have data analysis conversations on inline choice at the same time. You'll also quickly see that hot text is only going to be for 3rd through 5th. So again, on that question before, it was a hot text question, it was 8th grade. That may not be the best bang for your buck. A text entry would probably be a little bit more appropriate based on the way the state is going. So looking at this, it gives you that bird's eye view, and then it allows you to make some decisions on exactly where you go with new question types and have conversations with teachers by content area.
Awesome. Thanks, Emily. Now we're going to look at, we have another opportunity for you to engage in the chat. Thanks to everyone that's having conversations and helping one another out in there. So we'd like to know now, how is your district or campus taking on new item types? Are you like you have already dived in, you are using all of these? B, are you implementing a few at a time? Or C, are you taking them one step at a time for the beginning of this school year? Okay, we have mostly A's and B's coming in, so I hope that feels like you're in a comfortable space as you are getting the school year started. Some of you are replying that you started this last year. Great. Hopefully you feel like you have a good foundation and are able to keep that rolling into this school year. Okay. Next, we're going to look at some math examples. And so as you noted, as Emily was describing those RLA examples, there might be situations where you decide to use an item that isn't necessarily on the preliminary list from the TEA to use in a specific grade level. There could be lots of valid reasons why you choose to do that. So here we have an example where our written standard starts with students being able to represent, and we really want them to focus on a skill of expanded notation. This could look a lot of different ways instructionally for us, and we know we're going to have to do some scaffolding at times for our students. We might see them making errors, decide to pull a small group of students together so we can quickly correct or redirect those mistakes that they are making and allow them to build a strong foundation moving forward. So here we have this represented as a potential as a text entry item. So some things to consider here. If the order of how a student inputs their response is critical, you might want to consider how that would be represented within an item type. With text entry, you do have the option to add multiple correct answers. So if students are able to demonstrate that they have the knowledge, but maybe they transpose something, you could make sure that those answers are still counted correctly. So again, depending on where you're at in the learning cycle, you might choose to select an item that isn't on the preliminary TEA chart to help scaffold and guide your learners throughout that learning process. Next, for math, we're going to look at inline choice. So here we have one of those fancy standards that has more than one verb. So we know we're likely going to display this lots of different ways for students. So here we are wanting them to use some rich content vocabulary. We're asked to use formal geometric language. Before we can do that, we know there has to be a baseline understanding that's appropriate for our students. So we're going to have lots of exposure through our instructional unit on exposing students and making sure they have that basic understanding of shapes, and then grow that into their ability to classify and sort these objects using that rich geometric language. So here in this assessment item that is using inline choice, we have a group of objects that have already been sorted. So a portion of the standard is already represented for the students, and we're narrowing it down and trying to determine, can they classify? Are they able to determine what characteristics allowed us to group the objects in this format? So again, this might be an example where we're measuring part of the standard, and we would want to see additional items for the students to know, do they understand the whole of this standard? So these are great to pair together. Think about what you need to ask students to do and how might that be represented in a couple different ways through either your assessments for formative and summative use of that data. So here is another opportunity for you to see this display. So with math, we have a lot of item types that can be used across the grade levels. So we just looked at text entry for some 5th grade standards, and inline choice for a 3rd grade standard. And again, there might be other examples of how you could represent and test this content using the technology enhanced items. So with math, students have between 6 and 9 potential new item types that they might be encountering. So this would be great for your teams to pair up cross-curricularly. What are students also exposed to in RLA that at the beginning of the year or maybe last year, they already got practice doing something like text entry or doing something like inline choice in another content area. And now we can expand what students know and apply that in another content area. So we don't want anyone to feel like math is the only one doing certain things. We want you to figure out where you can collaborate and continue to grow students' application and use of these items in a unique setting for your content area. So our next opportunity to engage in the chat is, have you seen or used our interactive question cards? If you have been using them, we'd love to hear maybe how. Are they displayed somewhere? Are you sharing the resource? And I'll go ahead and give you a little peek at what these are. And again, when you get the email of this recording, you'll have the link to access these also. These are updated as we release new items. So here is a preview of intermediate graphing, very relevant for our upper mathematics individuals. And then a preview of one of our newest item types, multipart, where you can ask students up to 4 paired questions from a single exposure. So again, these are updated. You will have the link in the resources that are emailed to you after this recording is done. Okay. Next up, we're going to look at some science content. So here with our written standard, we have Explore, which is going to naturally lend us to some lab and investigative work, which we know a certain percentage of our instructional minutes need to be devoted to that hands-on learning in our science classroom so that students are really getting that rich context of how these things apply in their everyday life. If you're using the 5E model, that Explore is going to be your friend in this learning series for students to really be hands-on in their exploration of this lab investigation. We can scaffold by giving them simpler examples and then build upon what they understand and are able to demonstrate in their knowledge to give them more complex examples. What I love about seeing something like this represented as a hotspot item is we've been doing that hands-on exploration with students. If they're using a device like a tablet, this type of item is still going to feel hands-on for a student. They can trace that circuit with their finger, identify and model with hand motions what that switch will do. Is it going to engage that light? Is it going to close the circuit? And they can quickly identify straight from there without having to transfer from an image to a text answer choice. So this is one of those highly interactive items that allows your content to continue to feel interactive in an assessment format. So again, depending on where you're at in the learning process, you might provide students a more simplified example than what we see here. And as they're getting towards the end and wanting to demonstrate mastery, you might see something that has multiple switches or different ways for them to engage with this content. And then next, we're jumping up to some high school content where our verb of the learning standard is asking students to predict. So they're going to have to be exposed to lots of different examples, and we can see some of the examples they need to practice with written out in that standard. When it comes to our 5E lesson model, giving students opportunities to explain in a collaborative setting and really go through these examples and see what are the different possible outcomes and how can I justify my understanding here. So one way this might be represented is with a drag and drop item type where you are providing the students with some context and giving them possible solutions that they could plug into a table. So that table in this case is a Punnett square for students to organize some information. But I can think of other ways that might benefit students to really show that they've mastered this content. And maybe we do something more that's text entry and we have them provide all of the answers instead of giving them that starting point of here's some choices that you can plug in. So lots of ways to approach this. Things that are going to help guide your decision is the verb that you are trying to measure, where you're at in the learning process with your students. Are we still providing some scaffolded supports for them, or are we ready for them to fully independently demonstrate what they know on this content area? And so again, we have that nice table simplified for you for the science items by grade level. This is another rich opportunity for you to bring your professional learning communities together. We know that our 5th and 8th grade STAAR assessments are unique in that they are not isolated to that grade level learning standard. We need to make sure that our 5th grade teachers know and can support the 3rd and 4th grade teachers with how can students be exposed to these item types prior to 5th grade science. So again, having some cross-curricular teams or cross-grade level teams come together and have a strategy for what does this look like? Especially your end of course teachers, do they have a connection to your middle school teachers? What did text entry look like for our 8th graders that we can continue building on that foundation as they enter high school? So lots of opportunities for people to collaborate and build understanding so that we're getting rich examples in front of our students. And we know what they've already spent time practicing and implementing in prior grade levels. So we have another opportunity to hear from you. Seems we agree that these make assessments more engaging for students, but are our teachers excited about this yet? Do they still have some fears that they're harboring that we can help support them? Okay, we have some excited A's that we have some early adopters and we can leverage their understanding and excitement. Sounds like those of us here have excitement we can leverage as well. Some of us are seeing a spread, but the majority of us, we still have some teachers that might be experiencing some anxiety around this topic. I said this a lot when I was in the classroom, and I still say it a lot now, time on task. So hopefully these tools are helping you see where are opportunities to practice these items so that not only do our students get time on task, but as teachers, we get time on task to understand what does data analysis look like for these items? What does it look like to practice in this type of setting? And how can some of these assessment designs of new item types come into my instructional routines as well? So thanks so much for sharing how you feel your teachers are, what their excitement level is around this topic right now.
All right. I love it. But this group's pretty excited. I like that. This is an excited group about it. Y'all are very knowledgeable. All right, so let's talk a little bit about social studies, wrap up with the last content area. And so this one, we're going to show match table grid for our social studies. And we have a written text that's saying, identify groups and why they settled in the United States. And so what were some of the reasons for immigration? So I really actually love match table grid for this one. A lot of tie-ins with when we teach this, we do have some card sorts. We have them identify with matching. We have them go through and speak to these things and engage in real world too. We have different activities going on in the US today. Do some of those activities make you want to immigrate to a different country? And so how can we apply that to the real world when we teach it, and then take those facts that we've learned from each one of these groups and then test it and see how students do? So I do, again, love match table grid for giving some facts related to each of these. Oh, sorry, I had to cough. And then providing each one of those groups for a student to respond to. So love this one for that. Okay, in our last example for social studies, we have an open-ended or constructed response where we have some written text. Oh, I'm going to cough again. I'm so sorry. Oh, the allergies hit right as you start speaking. Okay, well, we're asking kids to analyze westward growth and look at the Louisiana Purchase. So for this one, again, we may start out with some maps, and we may start out by asking kids to draw on the map and identify locations. But inevitably, when we start asking them to respond and let us know what they know, then really the standard is asking the student to analyze this information. So I do love an open-ended response for this analysis, because it really gives us insight into that student voice and exactly what they know and how many different facts they can give us about specific events and the actual development. So we can see all of that again. But for an early iteration of this, I love hotspot for maybe that map type question, to have them identify locations and regions that were important. But in the end, tying it back to that analyze vocabulary there, we really would want to see, what do they have to say? What does that student know in their own words that they can provide us this information? All right, and then our items by grade for social studies are the most straightforward. So this is very exciting. We have these all listed here, and they apply to both of our social studies areas. So inline choice, hotspot, hot text, you can see all of these. They go all the way down, and so it's easy for our social studies teachers to have these conversations as their questions align perfectly. And so there's no divide between grade levels. So easy navigation there for them to have these collaborative conversations. Okay, so this one you don't have to answer. This one's more of one of those questions where we can actually just kind of stop and think about it. So how are we, or how can we use some of the resources that we have during this time of transition? So I do keep hearing like transition is difficult. This is a large transition. So what all is available to us at our fingertips that we can really grab and use? Very, very reasonable question to ask. So we do have a lot of questions coming in about item banks. How many questions exactly are in every single one of the item banks? And as you can guess, like this information was really not finalized until June. And so for item banks to be able to turn around and reproduce these final decisions for new question types is going to be rare and not as many questions as, of course, we would love to be available for teachers to grab and start using, and for us to start grabbing and putting into place. So with that being said, we have to make adjustments. And so what do we have at our fingertips that we can use and we can transition into? So we're going to look at, I grabbed some STAAR release questions as part of a process. I've had this conversation with a lot of teachers over the past couple of weeks. And how do we take a question, for example, that was on STAAR in the past, and how do we transition that into one of these new types of questions? And that is ideal. And so if you look here, we have input output from STAAR, and the standard is written below. So students are really asked to represent problems with input and output, and it says specifically to generate a number pattern. And so when you look at this STAAR release question, they really aren't generating a pattern. They're just deciding what the pattern is. And so how could we take this question and how could we transition it into one of the new item types? So if Terry, you'll go ahead and click for me, I'll put some options on there. So which one do you think would be a good new interactive item type question for this STAAR released item? And as you start responding, the great thing is none of y'all are wrong. Absolutely. But of course, there lends itself to being some that may be a little bit easier. They may be a little bit more conducive for this type of question and this type of standard based on the verbs that we're seeing. All right, so I see lots of, I see A, B, C, I see all of the above, a lot. Well, no D so far. So sticking with some A's, some C's. Great. Okay, well, I'm going to take this opportunity to kind of lean into it. I would choose drag and drop. And again, there's no right answer, but I would choose drag and drop because if you haven't gone in and looked yet, we have templates for drag and drop. One of the templates for drag and drop is an input and an output table, just like this. So you could use that template and you could input the math based on. By having a student or by creating a question that way, it will actually allow the student to drag in and generate that sort of input and output formula for you to be able to visually see it. So that is awesome. So if you have not checked out our drag and drop templates, that is a great, easy way to plug in this question and it be very, very simple. So go check those out. Okay, we'll move on to another example. Okay, so for this example, we just have a student being asked from a paragraph to read the sentence and let the sentence helps the reader to know that the train company will, and really they're just regurgitating an idea. So what is the central idea of the question? And it's just really asking them from that paragraph, what do you know? What's the idea? So go ahead and click for me, Tara. What could be some options here? So how could we transition this one? What do you think you would want to transition this one into? Again, there's really no wrong answer based on the way that you redesign the question, but we're looking for that central idea and we're really trying to see if they can grab that evidence for that central idea based on that paragraph. Oh, good group. We have lots of C's. I saw an A, I think /B, A or B. No D's, I don't think so far. Sticking with your A, B, or C. I like it. Okay, again, none of these would necessarily be wrong, but I would lean into hot text. So as we see hot text being that question where you're really trying to grab evidence. So you want the student to be able to cite that evidence and select it and to be able to interpret it as being the correct answer. And so hot text would be a great one for them to go through and grab that. And then if it was at that upper level, I could see where constructive response would be a great one as well. So you could get their feedback immediately and hear that student voice. So again, based on that grade level, you might decide which one or the other, but neither one would be incorrect. They would both be great. So again, this is a great part of the process that we're really going to have to transition into. As item banks come out with new questions, that's wonderful and that's great, but we're still going to need to start asking ourselves, is it really matching how we taught it? And is it really matching what the standard is saying that the student needs to be able to do or demonstrate? So we just really want to prompt you with that. Grab those old questions and see how you can recreate those. It's not as complex in the system as a lot of us are thinking right now. All right. So we're hearing from you again, and y'all have been so good at responding. So have your teachers seen the new types and have they broken them down in a variety of ways? So where are they? Yes, they were with you this summer doing PD. They've been exposed. So yay for that. Or we enjoyed our summer break and we are conquering that right now. And that's okay too. C's. We enjoyed our break. I like it. I like that honesty. Yes. That's great. Hey, we needed a summer break. Yeah, there's plenty of first teachers too. There's plenty of teachers that are brand new to the profession. So great year, lots of learning. All right, I like it. So you came in at a good time, especially if you're at a C. We're hoping to give you these resources today so that you can literally grab these and run with them. And these be supports for your teachers. That's really our whole goal, is we can go out and we listen to what feedback we hear and what the needs are. And we really try to meet that. So not just in software, but in content, and provide you that bridge so that it makes both worlds easier. So for this next part, we're going to talk about interactive question types, and we're going to really look at some of the verbs and how we can start building a system. Again, when the system changed, we kind of have to start from scratch and rebuild. So I'm going to tell you how I did that. I kept hearing from a lot of teachers that were just like, I don't know what hot text is. I don't know what hotspot is. These are weird words. You need to kind of help me and guide me through what in the world am I supposed to do with these new question types? And that is fair, 100%. So what I did is I took my handy dandy old paper journal and I started writing down the major verbs of the standards from grades 3 all the way to US history. Wrote them all down, started making sure that I had all of those major concepts. They begin to start duplicating themselves as you do that. And then I started organizing them by depth of knowledge. So which ones are just basic that we're asking you to identify, to recall, all the way up to that analyze and synthesis. So I started breaking them down that way, prioritizing them by their purpose. And then the next part that I think is the highest need is really saying what item type is there and what is its purpose. So what are these new item types and what are their purposes? And then how can we align these two? So how can we take those verbs and say, well, this verb actually aligns with this type of question. So when I see that verb in the standard, I can automatically look at a few of these question types because they're naturally going to be a good fit. So that was just my process of breaking all this information down. And then I'm going to go ahead and give you what I came up with. So we'll give you a couple of examples of these, but we have an awesome PDF that has each one of these on a one-pager, just broken down for you. And so you can take that and utilize it, or you can take it back to your district and say, hey, we want to create this ourselves. And that's even better than using mine. So as an example to get you going, hot text, again, that's that highlight, that text evidence. It's really citing information. So these are the top 10 verbs that we aligned with hot text. So you can see using text evidence, using context, apply, compare, identify, making an inference. So these would be the ones that when you see these verbs within the standard, that could be a good place to go to hot text and say, oh, this might be a good question, especially if I'm really just started teaching this concept, even if I am in 8th grade. Hot text may be a great way to start looking into this just to see if they're able to identify it. If they know DOK1, that's very insightful. Okay, we can go to the next one. All right, for inline choice. So this one is really, when you look at the root of this question, it's asking you to make a statement true or to make these facts line up. And so in order to do that, some of the top 10 verbs you might see would be using context to determine, problem solving, comparing and ordering. You kind of get the idea. So these would be allowing you to see that connection, that when you see these verbs, it's really a great place to say, how can I put these concepts together in an inline choice and make a student really rationalize that and say, how do I determine this? And what does this information look like when combined together? So a great way to start looking at these things, and maybe as it becomes second nature, they kind of start popping out in your head. We have one final example. We did hotspot just in the webinar today, but again, we have a PDF of all of them. And so for hotspot, we're really saying, here's an image, and how do you identify parts of that image? Can you identify it for me? And so here are some of the obvious verbs that I thought went with this one. This one stuck out very easily. Use a model, locate on a map, solve problems, identify, investigate. So you can see some of those and how they fit and how they would work really well with hotspot. So again, seeing some of those verbs can make the connection in your brain of, oh, I could do an image with this, and then I could ask the student to identify parts of that image. All right, so we hope that you like those. I saw a couple of your comments saying that you really liked these. These are great examples. Thank you so much. That makes me feel very happy. But we really want to propose that if you're kind of like, ooh, you know what, I disagree with some of those top 10 verbs, that's great. Absolutely. I 100% agree that you could have some varying ones on there. But how may you modify this in your district? So how could you take this back to a grade level and start empowering teachers to kind of go through this process? And I know right now they're probably still understanding what are the new question types, but as they start getting around that corner, then we can start saying, how can we use that question type? What verb do you think is appropriate based on your grade and subject area and the depth of knowledge that you're teaching? And how can we do this and make our own little cheat sheet that we want to use? I think that would be a great activity. And again, you may be saying, oh, wow, we just told you that we had summer vacation and we haven't done a lot of PD. Absolutely. So once you get there and you're ready, this could be a great topic. And if not, you are more than welcome to use our top 10 ones that we came up with. All right, what's next? We're going to kick it over to Kajisha to show us some really cool stuff that we have coming up for you for students.
Thank you, Emily and Tara, for that presentation on interactive item types. As we look to what's next for Eduphoria, we're beginning a journey of allowing students ownership of their data. With the ever-growing differences in individual student performance, it is more important now than ever that they can access their own data and take responsibility over their own growth. So before we get started looking at the exciting changes, I'd like to take a second to just ask, oh, you guys are already doing it. So from 1 to 5, 1 being not very important and 5 being one of the most important things, how important is it for students to own their data? I'm seeing a lot of 5s. We have a resounding number of 5s in the chat. Awesome. 1,000, April says. Okay, thank you so much for that feedback. Let's go ahead and head into the next slide. So our first release to facilitate a place for all of these new student tools was the online student testing portal. We were able to update it to a more student-friendly design, allow for easier navigation, and provide students with more information. We have created a new resource dedicated to students in our online help guide. So students can actually click on the question mark next to their name, and they'll access articles that are written at a 5th grade level that have visual representations like GIFs that help them navigate each question type and online testing in general. We also have a new tab called My Test Scores, which is a new place for students to access their score summaries. Students can now see their raw and percent scores. And Alexis said we need the data to go beyond raw score and percent score, and we are going to work on that. Thank you so much for that feedback. And then in the case that there is a rubric score where teachers need to manually grade test items, students will not see a score until it has been reviewed, and then the score will update in that table. To help combat the issues of test privacy, we've also created a bonus setting for test authors related to the student score summary, which I'll explain a bit more on the next slide. Here we go. So the student score summary window setting lets test authors choose a window of time for students to access their test results. So you can set this apart from the test administration window to allow all students the opportunity to take the test first before releasing score review to everyone. If you're interested in enabling this feature, I linked the online help guide to the slide, and then you'll have access to it once the presentation is emailed to you. And we can move on to the next slide. So students have access to many tools while they're taking their online test that support best practice testing strategies, such as taking notes, eliminating answers, flagging questions, consulting a reference, and highlighting. Emily spoke to this a little bit in the beginning. The notepad tool is so powerful, and it can be used during the test for students to show their work, and it can be used post-assessment in the score summary window. Students can use the notes for test corrections by providing their new answer and a rationale there, and then you can see their new notes in the test proctoring area as well. So that's really powerful. If you do perform that, that would be a really easy integrated way to do that on Eduphoria. And then let's go to the online help guide. Oh, go back. Okay, so then I also linked the online help guide, which just go through all the online testing tools that are available. And then we can go to the next slide. So then this is a question that I wanted to go ahead and throw off to you guys. What is the first thing you'll do when students have access to data? And then we have 4 options there. So the future is students owning their data. And there are so many exciting changes that are coming to Eduphoria that will allow students to access more data and take ownership of their learning. So we're conducting research to see what teachers and educators are using in the classrooms, and then we'll be able to make that possible. So that's why I loved that feedback that was presented in the chat, because it helps us know that there are more things that we need to offer and have open to students, and it helps fuel all of our product decisions. So these are just a few concepts that we're working through: setting performance goals, tracking mastery, measuring confidence, engaging with feedback, providing students tracking mastery with each TEAC. Exactly. So with these concepts in mind, we'll be making the product decisions to allow students to have more access to their data.
Okay, we are going to wrap up, and we are right at about on time. So that is perfect. And of course, I just wanted to reiterate, we saw several questions about are y'all going to go into depth on how to create these and scoring and all of the different components for creating new question types? And that is a great resource to call to email training@eduphoria.net and see if you want to get some of that hands-on training. So in our webinars, we're really trying to give you some really big picture concepts to take away, and that would be a great opportunity to reach out to our training team and get some of that hands-on type of training for those new scoring and for all the new question types. There's lots of new. So our training group is wonderful for that. Really quickly, I did want to cover coming soon. I saw this in the chat many times. When will the equation editor be available? So there's a little picture of it there on the screen for you. And so that should be available very quickly. We already have that pretty much ready to go. So you should be seeing that out very soon. quickly followed by the inequality graph. And so allowing that higher level of graphing for students to go ahead and do that Algebra 1 type graphing. So you'll be seeing those coming out very, very quickly. And we are excited that those are really going to be the last couple of question types that we will be pushing out, and we have everything else available. So very, very exciting to be rounding that corner with those new items.
In addition, we have recently released some digital learning that you could offer to your teachers. So we know that our time is spent divided across many things, and many of you that are present are not actively in the classroom on a daily basis. While there might be some days that you are guiding students instructionally, there might be many days that you are guiding the teachers and how they use these tools. So what if your teachers had access to asynchronous learning content targeting topics in Aware and Strive? Is that something that would benefit you and your campus or at your district? If so, we're providing you access today to our free teacher learning site. So this link will be included with the follow-up email that you access. We also have an online help giving you an overview of what this content is and how it is structured. So our curriculum team here at Eduphoria has worked with team members in product, team members in our training team to come up with standards of what does it mean to begin to master the tools you have here in our product like Aware and in Strive. So we're very excited to have this published for you all. Your teachers, as well as yourselves, will be able to engage in short instructional videos, have hand-selected online help guide articles paired with that, and some optional self-reflection questions that you can sit and independently reflect on or take to your PLC if you choose to engage in this with a team. So we hope that you will explore that whenever the email comes out tomorrow. And I'll go ahead and drop an online help to give you a little bit more of an example of what to expect in that content. If you'll hold with me briefly, I'll get that in the chat before we close. And then finally, to continue extending your learning on these high value topics, next month, we will be featuring some district voices. So we will be coming back together for another Wednesday webinar in a district chat, thinking out the evaluation process, where we're going to hear from active practitioners and how they engage in reflection, professional coaching to really inform the evaluation processes at their district. And then later in the I get to hear from a fabulous team in Klein ISD and how they are leading professional development on the topic that we spent time exploring this afternoon. So they're going to help expose us to even more ideas of engaging in a hybrid style of in-person, face-to-face, as well as virtual learning opportunities to help your teachers really integrate with these new item types. So picking up wherever you are, we know a lot of you have exposed your teachers to this. We know a lot of you have spent time on task with your teachers and with your students implementing these items, and hopefully this team can help you go even deeper and continue supporting that for your campus. I'm going to go ahead and get that information dropped in the chat for you all, so you can access that learning site before that email comes tomorrow. And any final questions, we'll spend the next couple minutes wrapping up on those. As always, we appreciate your time here and your engagement with us, and we look forward to sharing all of these resources with you tomorrow.